wanted to also indicate that we will have a guest speaker arriving tonight that will be sharing information with us, and we'll talk about that as we progress. I would like to move that, along with bringing this meeting to order, we also accept the minutes from the last meeting and the agenda as written. Mr. Cazares? Thank you. So we will move forward with tonight's meeting. So first of all, everybody's familiar with the norms, I think, that we stated previously, but if anybody wants to glance over your norms and has any questions about those, we can do that at the start of any meeting. Just let me know. If not, we'll continue going on. Everyone should have the minutes from the September 29th, 2021 meeting. And at that meeting, everyone will recall we had some proposals from the CEA team that we are continuing to look over and into, and we will be responding by the next meet and confer meeting to those proposals. So as I stated before, we do have a speaker tonight. Our speaker is the CFO, the Deputy Superintendent of our district, Victoria Farrar. She's going to be talking to us about the state of the budget and updated information that seems to be coming in pretty frequently these days. And so she's going to be sharing that information with us, and we will also provide the opportunity for the CEA team to present any other proposals that they might have. Mr. Cazares?
So at this time, we do not have any new proposals to present. We were just looking forward to Ms. Farrar's presentation.
Thank you. So I know she's not with us yet. So I'm going to ask Mr. Holland, if you would be willing to check in and see if Ms. Farrar is going to be joining us shortly. I want to make sure, since she's not used to coming to our meetings, that she knows that she will be here to start out the meeting with us today. Thank you. And again, while we are waiting for that, I wanted to also share that while we think it's important to follow rules and to be professional and to follow certain formalities, we think that other formalities are maybe not as necessary. Clearly, we have to vote on proposals. Clearly, we have to be in agreement about who is speaking and who has the floor and those sorts of things. But I think that we have all decided that we can be a little less formal than we've been previously. Mr. Cazares, is that acceptable to the CEA team?
I believe our team agrees with this, yes.
Thank you. We can do, we can actually do a roll call for that to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I will say I'm going to make a motion that while we continue to ensure that we are voting appropriately on things that are brought before this body, that we don't have to vote on everything as formally as before, that Mr. Cazares and I can express agreement for both of our teams. And so I'm going to ask Dr. Heredia. Oh, I'm sorry. Does somebody have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Cazares. Dr. Heredia? Ms. Nash? Mr. Holland? Ms. Green? Ms. Stevens? Ms. Adams? Ms. Barrera? And Mr. Cazares? And I'm an aye, so that motion does pass. I don't think anybody will miss us constantly voting, probably. I hope not, at any rate. Again, just another perhaps reminder for everyone, in case there are those people viewing us that perhaps were unable to see what happened at our last meeting on the 29th. Just a reminder of some of the proposals. The CEA proposed a change to class sizes and caseloads, and that was something that they shared with the board team. K2, they were recommending 25 students per class, grades 3 to 5, 28 students per class, and grades 6 to 8, 32 per class. For special education, 18 students, total caseload with AM and PM combined. K through 12 self-contained, 9 students per caseload. 3 through 8 self-contained, 12 students per caseload, and resource, 30 students per caseload. As far as related services such as speech language pathologists, OT, PT, they want to adhere to the maximum caseload of 50 students per caseload. And that was one of the proposals. Another proposal was that there be a change to the related service provider, speech pathologist, OT, PT salary schedule. And so they did provide an in-depth recommendation for that. And finally, the other recommendation was a change. Oh, sorry, I just looked at the same one. The other, I'll see if I have this right. I'll just try to make sure I get this correct, and you guys can help me if I'm wrong. The other proposal was a change to the salary schedule for the school psychologists. And was there any change, Ms. Green, to number of days or anything like that? It was simply the salary schedule?
It was salary schedule, and interim salary, and the number of steps and COLA, so all related to the salary schedule for psychologists.
Thank you. And so those were the three proposals that were previously brought at the September 29th meeting that are still under consideration. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Additionally, we do have a sign-in sheet that's going around. I don't know if everyone got that yet. Awesome. It looks like everyone did. Thank you all for signing in. I appreciate it. And I'm running out of interesting things to say. The only other thing that I can recommend. Oh, Mr. Holland, have we heard back from Ms. Farrar? No? Okay. Thank you. We may just have to go knock on her door. Yes. So what I thought I would do again, just briefly, I can go over our meet and confer group norms. We're doing a pretty good job of starting and ending on time, I'd like to say, and that's one of our norms. That we recognize other team members to speak when appropriate, and we may call a caucus with a mutual agreement of the chairs. And if you don't know what a caucus is, that's simply the opportunity to step back from the whole group and meet with either your CEA team or your board team to discuss any information that may have been forthcoming in the meeting, okay? Team members will display courtesy and respect for each other during the meet and confer process by focusing on student achievement, being attentive to the topic, practicing active listening, and approaching each topic under consideration with an open mind. The district administrative team and the CEA team will respond to proposals within 2 meet and confer meetings. And my understanding, and again, please feel free to jump in on this. My understanding is that we may not reach total consensus at that point, but we'll respond. And perhaps we'll respond with needing additional information. Perhaps we'll respond with some sort of, I guess, mitigation to the proposal, some sort of editing of the proposal. So those are all possibilities as well, but you would still receive a response for those proposals. Our final submission for proposals would, of course, be December 15th, 2021, based on our meeting schedule. And so I just wanted to share that. So while we do wait for Ms. Farrar, I know, as I've shared with the team before, we're very lucky to have Mr. Gary Holland as a member of our team. And if you don't know, Mr. Holland is our Director of Finance here for the Cartwright School District. And I know Mr. Holland received some information today, which is very similar to what Ms. Farrar is going to be talking about. So, Mr. Holland, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the information that you received today regarding Prop 301.
This actually came up on Monday.
And you know what? Do you need a microphone?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, Dr. Heredia, thank you.
Otherwise, the camera won't capture it.
It's for YouTube. Thank you.
Is it okay if I take this off?
Yes.
Okay. Because I can't read and wear a mask at the same time. So actually this information was emailed to us on Monday, October the 11th. This came from ASBO, which is the Arizona Association of School Business Officials. And again, I know Victoria is going to talk a lot about this, so I'm not exactly sure how to bring it up. Basically, at the September bi-monthly board meeting, we were provided information about the K-12 aggregate expenditure limit. That's part of the Arizona Constitution. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee, or the JLBC staff, has completed an analysis of the limit. The analysis now accounts for former Prop 301 revenues falling under the definition of local revenues and includes an estimate of cuts facing Arizona school districts. Now, this is specific just for Arizona school districts, not charter schools, not empowerment scholarship schools, school district only. It goes on to mention that if you're a charter school or have an empowerment scholarship account, as I just mentioned, these cuts do not impact you. The estimated cut to school districts exceed $1.2 billion for the school year FY22. This is not a typo. Yes, $1 billion is correct. The JLBC estimate certainly demonstrates the magnitude of the cuts. The estimated cuts for the school district year for 22 would average, there, and there's Victoria, would average the $1,387 per school district student. This would mean a reduction of over 17% in state and local funding being available for school districts for this particular school year. And you have all this information that you were going to discuss, Victoria. This is the information that we got on Monday from ASBO, from Chuck.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of go over that. I wasn't a Dr. Long, so I apologize for being early.
That's no problem. So I'd like to just recognize that we do have our Deputy Superintendent and CFO, Victoria Farrar, here to speak with us about the budget and some of the concerns. And as everyone heard, Mr. Holland was just sharing some information that was recently received from the Arizona Association for School Business Officials regarding some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, or that we are facing. And so we appreciate, Mr. Holland, you sharing that. And at this point, I am happy to turn it over to Ms. Farrar.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. As Mr. Holland stated, I'll try to give as clear of an explanation of what's happening as I can. Last year, the voters approved Proposition 208, which added sales tax revenue for individuals above, earning wages above a certain threshold. The state and the Center for the Future of Arizona have been kind of in a battle with the courts on whether or not some of the provisions of Prop 208 were proper. So that went to court. The court determined that that the proposition and the votes are valid. However, the money raised from Proposition 208 would not be exempted from the aggregate limit statewide that schools can spend on education, that the state can spend on education. So it was remanded back to the court to figure out what the impact would be. The bad news with this is that Proposition 301, since it's no longer a voter initiative, it expired and was not renewed by the voters, it has also lost its exemption. So all of the funds from Prop 301, which is no longer, I'll just call it Classroom Site Fund because that still exists, Prop 301 does not anymore, and any potential revenue raised from Proposition 208 would now be subject to the calculation of the aggregate expenditure limit. So when you take both of those pots of tax revenue and the Joint Legislative Budget Committee is the agency that actually performs the calculation. They do projections. The information that we did receive from ASBO and Dr. Chuck Essex has the JLBC's analysis with it. So what it said is that this year, 2022, the year that we're in right now, if the legislature does not authorize districts to exceed the limit, it requires a vote, a majority vote in both chambers. If that does not happen, school districts statewide are above the aggregate limit by $1.2 billion. So that means that it's about $1,400 per student. Taking just a rough guess of how many students we have, that's about $18 million for us. When will we know if the legislature will authorize an exemption? Not until January.
Okay, we need to do a microphone, sorry. And you know what, we have another one. Ms. Stevens has one at her end if you'd like to use that. Mr. Holland, thank you. Just repeat what you said.
Yes, ma'am. No problem. Sorry about that. I was just saying that that's an $18 million cut to our current year budget. Plus, with our declining enrollment, we're already down. Victoria recently did a presentation at our recent admin meeting. Based on the budget that we currently have at this moment in time, our enrollment needed to be around 17,000 students, and we're down to about 14,000 students. So there you're at about approximately, 2.5 million. So add that to the 18 million, so now you're at 20.5 million cut to our budget for this school year.
And just to confirm, you're saying, Mr. Holland and Ms. Farrar, this school year, the 2022 school year, would necessitate that kind of a cut?
Correct.
That's correct.
If the legislature does not authorize an increase
Okay.
to the limit.
And may I also ask, as you present and speak to us, are you okay with people asking questions? So if anyone does have a question for Ms. Farrar while she's speaking, if I would just suggest that you just hold your hand up so that we can see and recognize you and that we can get you a microphone. Okay, thank you. All right.
Just to add to that, this has not happened. This has only happened once before. Wasn't it around 2008? Otherwise, if we've gotten to this point, the legislature, when I say they, the legislature has not imposed the limit, right? So it's not been an issue since 2008, 9, right after our Great Recession that we had. And so this hasn't been an issue for us since then, but it now can be potentially a huge issue for us, especially this year.
There are some questions, and I'm doing my best to dig into the reasons or the history behind the aggregate expenditure limit. But what I do understand is that this was set back in about 1980, and it's allowed to be adjusted for inflation at a maximum rate of 2%, regardless of, inflation's 10, you can get a max of 2, or fluctuations in student count. So if you think about, just conceptualize how prices have increased just on general goods and services between 1980 and 2021, with the understanding that the legislature only the Constitution only allows a certain percentage of inflation every, year over year, and it's not always been funded because of the recession issue that we had in 08-09. It's not always been consistently funded, if at all sometimes. Then add that to classroom site funds no longer being exempt from that limit, nor would results-based funding. So when the ruling happened for Proposition 208, when the court remanded that back to the trial court for calculation, that really hurt us, because things that were already exempt, that were considered exempt, all of a sudden fell back into the pot again. results-based funding, early literacy grant. Because all these come from the state. These aren't federal pass-throughs. This isn't like Title I that's, passed from the federal government to us. These are state-generated revenues via, various special taxes or assessments or things of that nature, because it's all state funding now. All of that is now back into the calculation, whereas before it wasn't. So theoretically, Proposition 301 had expired before last year. It expired in 2020. So last year, it should have been subject to the limit, but they didn't do the calculation that way because it was a non-starter, it was non-issue. It was a non-issue. But now, because Prop 208, the court said, yeah, it's an issue now, so go back and recalculate it. So that's why we didn't see that issue last year, even though it was no longer authorized. Something that I learned yesterday, Prop 301, when it was first voted on by the voters, it did not contain exemption language. So the voters had to go back the year afterwards and approve Prop 104, which made it exempt. So it was a double vote that made Proposition 301 exempt from the limit. The legislature always said, I won't say always, but they did say that you don't have to worry about classroom site funds not being there because we're just going to continue to fund it. But what was not said was that, one, we don't have to reserve it for its intended uses anymore. Now it's just regular state money, so we can take some, which they have done. I think the first year that it lost its protection, the state took $74 million and spent it on other stuff. And then to add to that, it's now lost its protection because of the lawsuit on Prop 208. It's distressing, to say the least. I think I didn't sleep for like 3 days when I heard that it was going to be $18 million in the current year. I'm like, how do you even do that? How do you do that?
Because funds are earmarked, correct? When the year starts, we already have funds that are earmarked for certain things. Okay.
There's already contracts, employment contracts that have been signed, purchase orders issued, but the expectation is clear. If you have or come up against an issue where you're over the limit, whether because you didn't budget right or the state says you need to reduce your budgets, both are possible. You have the business manager and the superintendent and the governing board have an obligation, a requirement to reduce expenses below the limit. So it's not an option. And it has been done. You cancel contracts, you do current year RIFs, you do those things because you have to. There is no choice of whether you can or can't. As long as you get down below the limit, then nobody's going to be reprimanded or removed or,
You cannot
fired.
overspend your budget, period.
Period.
It's not an option. School districts that have overspent their budget, when I worked for the Department of Education, I was part of the committee that had to go in and take that school district into receivership. And when that happens, they go in, they remove the superintendent, they remove the CFO, they remove all the director of business services, all those people go. The school district no longer has control over their own budget because clearly you demonstrated that you can't control your budget. So now the state will bring someone in and control it for you. A couple of things that I just wanted to add onto what I was reading a little bit ago. Victoria talked about the estimated cut for the school district for this year would average $1,387 per school district student. This would mean a reduction of over 17% in state and local funding available for school districts this school year. This cut would wipe out many recent funding increases like teacher salary increases. We finally got full restoration of our district additional assistance, which is our capital funding. The increased funding that we just got for special education and others. It does go on to say that for a charter school or an ESA, student cut is 0. The legislature can override the limit, as Ms. Farrar just mentioned, on an annual basis. They have until March of 22 to make that decision to override the 22 limit, but they need to do that at the beginning of the legislative session in January so that parents, students, and school districts don't have to worry about what cuts would do to students and school district programs this school year. We do not agree with the details contained by the JLBC, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee report, and have not seen all of the data and assumptions underlying the report. But we agree that the cuts to school districts are the largest proposed cuts to Arizona school districts ever.
And this information is from ASBO,
This is
correct?
the email we got from ASBO on Monday, yes.
Okay. So I guess another question I would have, and if somebody else, again, if you have a question, please feel free to ask. My question is also, I assume we don't have an ETA on when there will be a final decision on Prop 208, but you did say we should have a decision from the legislature in January regarding our funding. Is that correct?
The decision for Prop 208 is done. That is the decision. It's constitutional, but it's subject to the aggregate limit.
Okay.
That is the decision.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Casares.
So we do have questions, but we would like to request a quick comment. You want to ask your question now? Okay. Okay. So we do have a quick question now then.
Victoria's talked enough with me to know that she uses a lot of big words. So I just want to make sure, because I'm sure I'm not the only person out there that teaches middle school. And it's like, okay, so Prop 208, no-go. That was, just checking understanding, that was included in the projected budget. So 208 funds we had not received as yet, but it was included in the projected budget. But 301 was included in the projected budget, but is not anymore because it's gone.
No, okay, Prop 208 was not included. You're talking about our budget forms?
I thought we were talking about budgets. Okay. Okay.
So
Wait, Gary.
Yes.
Mr. Holland, you need a microphone.
I can repeat. I can repeat. So to check for understanding, you wanted to know, or clarifying if the Prop 208 funds are included in our current year budget. The answer to that is no, because we don't have any estimate of what that revenue would be. So that's not included in this year.
Okay, I'm trying to understand if there was the loss of Prop 208 funds.
There's
That we haven't-
there's no loss to funds yet. And I can come back and explain that at a different meeting, because that's tax based, and the argument is that it creates a surcharge on individuals that make more than a certain amount. But there were subsequent legislative decisions on tax cuts to minimize that. So that analysis, Mr. Holland and I have not done that particular analysis. You know, that's like, how is this going to work at the state level? Because the state has done other things to minimize it. Okay. So from what I understand, and for my own check for understanding when it comes to what the state is doing, the state is not happy with 208, unhappy with 208. They want it gone. So they found a way to do something with the tax collections and reclassifying tax brackets and all this other stuff that is not my expertise, to turn that into a non-starter anyway.
Okay, so I think I'm understanding Prop 208, because as you know, the collection of signatures and fun things like that. So we have a Cartwright budget.
It is not in our 208 is not in our Cartwright
So when we were
budget.
talking about the deficit or the loss of the funds, it's not including Prop 208, but it is including the loss of 301 monies?
It's not a loss of funds. It's a loss of budget capacity. Cash is one thing. if I can, hopefully I don't make this more confusing, but maintenance and operations is a budget-driven account. I can have zero in the bank in Fund 1, but I can borrow as much as I need to pay obligations out of Fund 1 because I have a budget. Up to the limit, correct. What's happening with 301, let's say that my M&O budget is $100. That's all the legislature says that I can spend. I've got $2,000 sitting in cash. How much can I spend? 100. I have more cash than I'm legally allowed to spend. That's what's happening with 301. You've got the cash. The cash is there. It's a tax that's been collected. But if it's subject to what the maximum amount of your school districts statewide can spend, it doesn't matter how much cash you have, because they're going to say your budget is going to be $100 even though you have $2,000 sitting there. So Classroom Site Fund is in our budget. It is not in Fund 1. It's Fund 10. It's a separate fund right now. But what they're saying is it's going to be part of the limit to Fund 1. I've got $1,000 sitting in Fund 10 that I can't spend.
May I also ask, did you indicate, or did Mr. Holland indicate that this same was not going to apply to charter schools? It was only going to apply to traditional public schools?
That is correct. But that's not surprising, considering there's, charter schools don't have the same requirements as a district school, not just on the revenue side, but on the expenditure side either. They don't have quote thresholds. You need 3 quotes after you spend $10,000 with a vendor that's not on a contract. They don't have that issue. They can spend whatever on whoever, whenever. They don't have procurement rules the way we do.
So this is all about me. Now it's my understanding. Sorry, everyone. So there is potentially, when you talk about budget with people and you talk about spending and you hear a lot of, well, how are we short money if there are new roofs? How are we short money if there are new? So what I'm, again, understanding, or maybe not understanding, we have certain funds, and some funds can roll over and some funds cannot. So where-ish?
Some funds, every fund has a different purpose.
Okay. Okay. Let me bring all that over.
Do we have other questions too from anyone on the board team or the CEA team?
Well, you brought up roofs, and I would like to address that because that's a very good question. We apply for grants from the state to have, critical systems repaired. So roofs is one of them. So when we applied to the state for a grant to fix a roof, that is a separate account, and that's only used for that. So we actually, in that instance, we actually send invoices to the state. They review all of that. Okay, well, this looks good. So now we're going to give you the money so you can pay the vendor. That's how that works. So that's not in our budget up front, but the one that everybody reviews in June and July, because those are ongoing projects, but that's always included at the budget that's presented in May, and then also on the financial reports the year after. Those funds, yes, that's state money, and yes, that's going to schools. That is exempt from the limit. So you got $1,000 in that account, your budget's $1,000. You've got $1,000 in that account, but we haven't given you the cash yet. You can spend $2,000 because that's what you've obligated. Generally, that's generally the idea with that type of a fund. So that's a different thing. That's not M&O.
And
I guess.
No, all I was saying is that, as Victoria was explaining, that funding comes from a state agency's budget, the school facilities board, So that's not money that the district has any control over. And as you mentioned, it's a grant. So we have to apply to the state and ask them if they will consider repairing the roof. And they will say yes or no. They will say, well, maybe we'll fix this square, but not that square, sort of thing. So it's a grant. There's no guarantee. Also, the district recently was approved in the last November election for bond funding. Okay, so we had our first bond sale in March. And so bond funding is money that is used for buildings, roofs, furniture. It's not used for operating type of expenses. So there's no salaries or any of that type of stuff comes out of that funding. So like, for example, we're talking about the state agency SFB. So if SFB says, okay, it's going to cost, let's use easy numbers. It's going to cost $1,000 for your roof, right? We're going to give you $800. You got to come up with the other $200, for example. And so that's where that bond funding helps come into place too. Okay, so here's the other portion of our repair or replacement for the roof out of that particular pot of money. Again, when we're talking about reduction in our budget, we're talking about the reduction in our spending limit as a whole, right? So as Victoria was mentioning, 301, yes, is part of our budget. It's in a completely separate fund. 208, we don't even know how much that money is. That money's not available to us right now, but it is because of it's now being included as part of the constitutional limit. Then we're going to exceed that. You have to then do a cut across the board for all school districts in the state.
And the Department of Education actually does that calculation, and then they tell everybody this is how much every district needs to cut. That's where how that gets determined at the end.
No, they'll come back and they'll say, okay, we have calculated if this goes into place, all school districts will need to cut your budget by, as I said here, $1,387 per student. So they'll do that calculation. They'll say, Cartwright, you have to cut your budget $18 million. And that all comes out of your Fund 1 budget. So it's not going to decrease your 301 or your classroom site money. That money's still going to be there, but it's part of that limit that says you can't spend more than.
So they will take it out of 001.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. We do have plenty more questions to ask. We would request a quick caucus if that's okay with you, Ms. Doyle.
Absolutely. And how much time would you like?
We'd like about 10 minutes.
Perfect. Did you guys want to go in the small room? Do you want us to go in the small room? What works best?
We have a conference room already.
Perfect.
We're gonna head there.
Okay, perfect. So if we could probably reconvene in here at about 5 till, does that work? Or 4 till?
It works.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
That's why I'm here.
It's on the front. Yep. Okay, so welcome back. It is 4:56, and we are all back together again, still with our guest speaker, Deputy Superintendent, CFO Victoria Farrar. And again, I wanted to, before she continues, ask if we have any further questions before she continues.
We do have questions, actually, and first question is going to be asked by Ms. Hannah Adams.
Okay, yeah, okay, it's on. My question is, what is the student loss from the 2019-2020 school year to now? And then also, where can we find that data?
Great question. So you're looking from school year 2020 to now?
Yes, the 2019-2020 school year to now.
That information is publicly available, and it's on AD's website. If you do go to, and I'm trying to think of it in my head, go to school finance, and then once you're in there, you do a search for reports. You can find school year 2020 reports, what you're going to want to see is it's an APOR-55-1. That's an apportionment report 55-1. What that is, it looks like this. Thank you, Gary. And what it shows you is actually your actual ADM, average daily membership. And it actually, page by page, takes you through the calculations of what your budget is for both M&O and capital. So it's a several page report. It'll break it down by special education student, by need. It doesn't have any personally identifying information on it, which is why it's available publicly. It's just numbers. It's just numbers and calculations. So that's where you would find 2021 and prior. For current year, for 2022 going forward, there's a different link, but it's still going to be available via the school finance homepage. They are called, I believe, BSA reports. BSA 55-1. So that's Bravo, Sam, Alpha. The other one is Alpha, Papa, Oscar, Romeo, APOR. So these are BSAs. I don't know what BSA stands for. I'll figure it out, Cindy, but it looks exactly the same. That's one way I learned about school finance was just going on the website and pulling down reports, because you can get these for every district and charter in the state. Going back to, I want to say 2009. It might even go before then. And there's different types of reports. It'll have transportation reports, just in, student count reports, and district of residence, district of attendance. Those are different terms, and you would probably find loads of information, more information than you probably ever care to know.
I'm wondering also if that information couldn't be found in Synergy.
But not everybody has access to
Right,
that.
and
yeah.
I know that's not the case, but I'm just wondering if that's something that we could also look at to pull information for people.
Synergy is the system of record for all of our student information. We send information out of Synergy via an export to the Department of Education, where they go through this process. It's a multi-step process. So we send them the raw data. It goes through a process of what they call integrity, happens once a month, where they make sure that the file they receive doesn't have any errors. So if it has errors, it's not going to process completely. So that's integrity. And then it'll go through a different process several days later called aggregation, where if everything passes integrity, then they'll do the calculations to come up with your average daily membership. And ADE has a schedule. It's on school finance webpage of the calendar of exactly when those reports are available. Oh, okay. No. Average daily membership is how we're funded. Enrollment is head count. So they are two different things. So let's say that you have knowledge of exactly how many students we have in kindergarten throughout the district. You know that by head count. But that looks a lot different when you're looking at average daily membership. Yes, there are two different things. Average daily membership has a specific definition, it's a specific calculation. If you have a student that was here on day 1 and they were here every day through the 100th day, that is a 1.0. If they came in January through the rest of the 100th day, that's not a 1.0. That student's only going to be calculated at a 0.2. So even though that's a student, a physical student, that you will not be funded as if he was here all year. So and we are funded on average daily membership, not on head count.
It's the average between day 1 and day 100. Also keep in mind, Victoria mentioned kindergarten, so you may have let's say you have 6 kindergarten students. The state only funds kindergarten at half. So really you're getting funding for 3 students, but you actually have 6 students for kindergarten.
And preschool, it's likewise, you're only the state does not fund preschool unless that child has a special education need.
Does that make sense?
You're very welcome.
Also, if you look at the budget presentation that I did in May, I have all of our ADM numbers right there on one slide for you going back several years. So it'll save you some, it's a little faster to find. You can find it in board docs than to find the reports. But the reports that I pulled the data from are available if you want to go find them or pull them. But,
Perfect, thank you. Appreciate that. Our next question is going to be asked by Ms. Andrea Barrera. Let me pass you. Oh.
Hi, good evening, CEA team, my fellow team and district team. Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. This question pertains to district office salaries and the proposed loss of $18 million. So we understand that 1/5 of the budget allocated for salaries is allocated to district office salaries. So can you please help us understand how this $18 million loss will impact that? Keeping in mind that we want to reduce the impact on students, of course.
Okay, can you clarify your question? You made a statement. Looks like you're looking at something on your computer.
Yes, my question. So the statement is that we understand that 1/5 of our total salary budget is allocated to district office salaries. So can you help us understand?
I'm trying to understand where you're coming the 1/5 from. Where is that coming from?
Sources? It's an understanding that we have, but we don't have a source to cite. But this is what we understand. Is that not your understanding?
I'd have to verify that, but I don't think that's correct. That doesn't
Okay.
sound correct at all.
Well, throwing out the 1/5 and just saying that there's a certain portion of our budget that's allocated to district office salaries, and so we're just wondering if you can help us understand how this projected $18 million loss might impact those salaries, keeping in mind that we want to reduce the negative impact on students.
For current year, using federal funds that we have available to us, there would be no impact to anybody this year. So next year, that's a longer conversation and a longer process. But for this year, let's say that, I'll just use me as that, but let's say that I'm funded out of M&O, but because I've got to balance the budget, I'm going to make myself paid out of federal funds. That's what's going to happen. It's not going to be an impact to anybody this year.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
And if I could weigh in as well, I do know just from conversations that we've been having, we're doing a lot of things at the district level through attrition. If we're losing a person at the district level, we're not replacing those positions. We are rather parsing out that person's responsibilities to other positions. I can't be specific before I arrived on the scene, but I can tell you since I have been here, I believe there have been 3 positions at the district level that have been vacated that we have not filled, and that is kind of the direction I've been given moving forward from cabinet.
Okay, I do have a follow-up question with that last statement. If we're going to divvy out, a former employee's responsibility, is a portion of that former employee's salary or pay going to go toward the person acquiring that new task, or is their pay going to stay the same?
The pay has stayed the same in the 3 instances I'm familiar with, and I don't anticipate that would change.
Perfect. Thank you. I just needed to clarify that one. And our final question will be asked by Miss Amy Jo Green, and whenever you are ready.
All right, I actually have like 3 because I'm never short-winded. Welcome to the board team, CEA team, everyone on YouTube. Once again, hit subscribe, crush that like button. I know that our members that are going to listen to this are going to freak out over the numbers because my tummy hurts myself. So I just want to get some clarification and ideas to kind of help allay their fears a little bit. And I understand that you say that there's no impact this year because we're using our ESSER funds to kind of support through the end of the year and then game planning for next year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Kind of looking towards next year, do we have any ideas, and I know that this is new information, do we have any ideas on how we're going to cut and reduce?
I cannot make any statement on that without other conversations that I need to have with other individuals. Yes, there's obviously going to be some plans, but this is too preliminary to discuss that here.
Okay. And I know when you were talking, when anyone says reduction in force, my ears just perk up. So I know that you had said that if the district does end up looking at reduction in force, is there a timeline of when staff would know? Because obviously very important to their livelihood and their planning and things like that. Is there an estimated date when people would know?
I don't think there's been any conversation regarding reduction in force at all, to my understanding.
When I made the statement about reduction in force, what I was trying to explain what the obligation would be if you if you don't have a choice. Districts and boards don't have a choice to cut funding if they tell you that you have to. If the state tells you you have to, you have to. There's no room for negotiation on that. So if you need to do a reduction in force, that would be required. What I'm saying is that we have enough federal funds to make sure that we don't have to be in that situation.
For this year.
For this year.
So looking at next year, is a reduction in force something that they have discussed at all?
No, those discussions have not happened.
Okay, is there an estimate of when we would kind of have the plan of how they're going to make cuts next year? So if there is a reduction in force, people would know?
The goal has always been to make, well, not always, but the board really wants everyone to have an idea before winter break begins, because that's ample time to finish the rest of the school year. So that's still the goal. Even with this new information, that was always the goal before. But with this new information, that does not change that timeline.
Perfect.
And also the number one way you would always look at if you needed to think about, reducing positions, the number one way you always start that process is through attrition. Just people leaving, positions are not filled. But again, I just want to be very clear, particularly for the people at home. There has been no discussion about reduction in force. Not even a hint of that, and I have no indication that that would occur this year or next.
Perfect. So if there's a 1,378 decrease per school district student this year for an estimate of about $18 million in cuts, do we know what it would be for next year, or is that a separate calculation that's forthcoming?
No, we would know, we would have an idea well before budgets are done for the following year, if that makes sense, because this is a new thing, and it had to be calculated now. Mm-hmm. Normally you have this information in February for the following budget year, so this is an odd one because of the court decision.
And is just because I'm not familiar with calendar year, financial year, when is the cutoff or the timeline for when you do the budget?
Oh, Gary, Mr. Holland does budgets. I'm very grateful to him for this. But the budgets are, again, on school finance. You can look at the calendar. There's timelines on the calendar. You can also go to the Auditor General's website because they have another calendar there's a manual called the Uniform System on Financial Records that applies to school districts. And that also has its own separate list of dates and deadlines of when we have to have budgets and when we have to send the information to the state agencies. So the fiscal year, when we refer to a fiscal year, that's always June to July, July to June. Obviously calendar year, January to December. So our timeline to have the budget adopted, proposed and adopted is always no later than mid-July of that school year. So our budgets, our proposed budgets due, I want to say the 15th of June. And then, of course, you're going to, or is it 5th of July? But the board, the Cartwright's board typically doesn't meet in July. That's not a normal meeting time. So all of ours are done no later than June for that next school year.
So that seems really late in the year. So would we kind of know
But
the
we
plan?
but like I'm saying, that the goal is to make sure if there's staffing changes that are needed for everyone to know in December. The goal for Meet and Confer, I don't know if you've already discussed this, is to have all of the negotiations and discussions here finished by January.
Correct.
And then that information will be used to prepare the budget for June, for July. So, that's the timeline here for Victoria and Gary. That timeline's February.
Sure.
basically.
No, I'm just saying because if we kind of know the game plan of these are the cuts, because like Glendale went wild and closed a bunch of schools, which I'm not saying we're going to do, but who knows? So I was just wondering when we would kind of know the game plan of what the cuts are going to be for next year. But if it isn't until when you do the budget kind of more towards summer, that doesn't give people a lot of.
It'll be between December and February.
Okay. And that's something that gets presented to the board that we'd be able to get that information from a presentation there?
I would assume, I would make that assumption, yes. That's more of a,
And one of the reasons that we started this process sooner this year, we have this, we try to get out contracts sooner rather than later.
Of course.
And so we want people to understand what is going to be in that contract when they sign the contract. And that wouldn't change as we look ahead to next year. If we're being fiscally responsible, which we must be, and which Ms. Farrar and Mr. Holland help ensure that we are, then we have a greater understanding at that point of what we need to do and where we need to be moving forward. I think anybody in education would tell you that, and I think Ms. Barrera alluded to that we want to keep cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. The idea is that you protect children and the best interest of children.
Yeah, thank you so much. And my final question is, obviously it behooves us to kind of work in tandem, especially dealing with the legislature. Would it behoove us to contact our representatives and urge them to either keep 301 as an exemption, exempt 208? What can we get our members to do to make our lives easier for ourselves and also help you?
that's a voter initiative. That's another round of collecting signatures and having something else placed on the ballot. The legislature cannot and, is highly likely not to do so. It takes a supermajority in both chambers in order to increase taxes, but a simple majority to decrease them. So there's a higher bar to do anything to increase. So your best option is always doing another initiative.
Well, luckily we're very skilled at getting signatures by now. But just to clarify, 301, they can't just decide to keep that exempted as they previously did. Now that it's in the pot, like we gotta go through the work to dig it out of the pot.
That's right. You got to take it back to the voters to reauthorize and make it exempt. So I believe it's 2000's Prop 301 and 2001's Prop 104, if you want to look up at the history of what the language of those two items was.
All right. Well, thank you for clarifying all of that information.
And Ms. Farrar, if I could ask you to just also let people know who might not know at home what a supermajority is.
A supermajority is at least 2/3 in each chamber. So it's pretty split. When you look at political parties, Democrats and Republicans, you're going to need a majority of all of them. 66 1/3 is a supermajority.
Thank you. Other questions from either anyone on the board team or the CEA team?
I think our team has asked all the questions, so we have our work cut out for us, but I believe in our members and the educators in the state to do what's right for the students. So I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you. And I want to thank you again, Ms. Farrar, for coming in and spending time with us this evening. I know you have family obligations too, picking up your kiddos, so appreciate your time so much. Thank you. And I just appreciate also, Mr. Holland, your input as well. I really appreciate the expertise both of you bring to our meeting today, so thank you again. Okay, so we already had indicated that we do not have any new proposals, and so that does take us to section F, which is the pending proposals, which I actually already went over. We do have 3 pending proposals, and I won't go through it again other than to say it's regarding smaller class sizes, regarding looking at the salary schedule for psychologists, and looking at the salary schedule for support services related personnel, such as OT, PT, things like that. And so those are proposals that we currently have from the CEA team. Other information, do we have any requests from anyone on the teams for future agenda items?
At this moment, so.
Thank you. And of course, you can always suggest those to, via email, but it would be beneficial if you would copy those emails to Alex, myself, and Heidi so that we all have that information. Okay, so our next meeting date, yes, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Holland.
Can you repeat what you said? Did you say you wanted me to forward you this email?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just was saying if people have suggestions for agenda items, they can always forward an email to Alex Cazares, myself, and Heidi so that we know that there's something that you'd like placed on
Okay.
the agenda.
My apology.
No, no problem.
You have that email if it's possible to share with me.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holland. So again, I keep putting my papers out of order, so I look really disorganized tonight. But again, our next meeting date, if I can get to that page. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Dr. Heredia. I just found the page, but go ahead and say it again. October 27th, same bat time, same bat channel, back here at 4 o'clock. Again, I know tonight's information is not uplifting to any of us. I do understand that. But I do want to reiterate, there is no discussion, no plan for a RIF this year or next, and I want everybody to be aware of that. I also appreciate the fact that people do the things that we can all do politically to support our school districts and to support our children, particularly in the Cartwright School District. So thank you all very much for your time and attention to that. I would like to make a motion that we adjourn the meeting. It is 5:20 p.m. Do I have a second?
I second.
And I think that we can just adjourn the meeting with Mr. Cazares and I asking for that. Thank you all again and have a wonderful evening.